Hey everyone, it's Miss Vilmez again. Now that we've kind of learned a little bit about what to expect when you're reading poetry and how to determine what type of poem it is, let's talk a little bit about analyzing poetry and how to understand what the author is saying and how they use their craft to develop a piece of literature. And we're going to be using something called the SWIFT method, and I'm going to explain to you what each one of these letters stand for and how we can use it to analyze a poem. And then at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you how to use the SWIFT method to analyze a poem called Abandoned Farmhouse. So you definitely want to watch that because eventually you're going to be doing the exact same thing. Alrighty, so first, the SWIFT method. So SWIFT stands for speaker, word choice, imagery, figurative language, tone, and theme. So we're going to be looking at how the author uses these things and starting to see, okay, what kind of mood are they trying to create? What are they trying to say? How are they trying to say it? How are they using their craft to write this poem in a way that I experience it as the reader? So first off, let's talk about the speaker. So that's when you're trying to figure out who exactly is narrating the poem. So remember, just because somebody wrote it does not mean that they're the narrator. Is there a character within the poem? Are they omniscient? And remember, omniscient means they see and kind of know everything. It's kind of like a godlike character. They're just kind of like above everything and they can understand everything that's going on. What can you figure out about the speaker from the poem? So we can make lots of assumptions just based on the poem, but what do they actually say about it? Do they give us an age, a race, a gender, a perspective? Those are things we have to think about when we're trying to determine who exactly is the narrator of the poem. Next, we have word choice. So remember, authors are going to use very specific words on purpose to try and evoke an emotion within you. So when you're trying to figure out what words to look for, look at those emotionally charged words. There's going to be powerful words within the poem that should kind of sound off as like an alarm in your head saying, oh, that's an emotion word. They probably chose that over a different word for a reason. So let me think about that. So remember, certain words carry more emotional meaning, and that's called a word's connotation. So a denotation is the word's actual definition versus a connotation, which is almost like the emotional weight or the flavor of the word. So for instance, if I say I'm sad versus melancholy, one of those words should evoke a stronger emotion, right? Melancholy sounds deeper, it sounds more lonely, whereas sad is a common word that we use every day. So if I was writing a poem and trying to evoke an emotion, I might choose the word melancholy over the word sad. And then we need to figure out why the author chose those words. So kind of just like I was saying, are they trying to evoke a specific emotion? Next, we have imagery. So what images are created in your mind when you read the poem? So it might be something that the author is describing. Look for that sensory language. So remember your five senses. The author is going to use those senses to kind of paint a picture in your brain. So they might describe what something looks like, how it smells, sounds, feels, tastes. Maybe it'll talk about emotions in there. Those are all sensory details that you need to look at. Next, we have figurative language. So that's definitely something that's going to be used very heavily in poetry. So remember the types of figurative language that we've looked at recently: similes, metaphors, extended metaphors, alliteration, idioms, personification, onomatopoeia, all those different things that we talked about in our last unit. So how does that figurative language enhance the poem and how does it add meaning? How does a simile make us understand what the author is saying better? How does it affect the audience? These are things that you definitely need to look at and think about as you are reading a poem. Next is theme. So remember, we've talked about theme before. It's the message or the moral of the story. So what is the message of the poem the author wants us to know about? And remember, themes are universal to life, so it's not just going to be about the poem. So just like when we were finding theme of Little Things Are Big and 11, it's going to be universal to life, so not just the poem. And finally, we have tone. So here's a little snippet from your tone chart. So if you didn't write down some tone words, I would take some time to do that now, because we're going to be talking a lot about tone when we read poetry. So you're identifying words and phrases related to the author's feelings and emotions in the text. So remember, tone is the author's attitude toward the subject. And you're going to look at things like word choice. So we've already even talked about that within SWIFT. So word choice is going to help you understand the tone the author is trying to evoke. So if they're writing kind of a funny poem, you might look in the humor or sarcasm section. If you can pick out negative, angry words from a poem, you're going to look over here. So remember, you're identifying the type of feeling, and then you can look closer at some different examples and kind of narrow in on the one that best fits the poem that you're going to read. So now that we've talked about SWIFTT, let's put it to practice with this poem, Abandoned Farmhouse by Ted Kooser. And I really want you guys to pay attention to this because I'm going to be asking you to do the same thing as part of your learning and part of your grade for this unit. So make sure you're paying attention to me doing it for you so that you know exactly what to expect when it comes to be your turn. So this is a free verse poem. There's no rhyme scheme, and we can see that it's broken up into 3 stanzas. So you can kind of see where it breaks apart in each one. So they're almost like little paragraphs. So let's go ahead and read the poem first. He was a big man, says the size of his shoes, on a pile of broken dishes by the house. A tall man, too, says the length of the bed, in an upstairs room, and a good, God-fearing man, says the Bible with a broken back, on the floor below the window, dusty with sun. But not a man for farming, say the fields, cluttered with boulders, and the leaky barn. A woman lived with him, says the bedroom wall, papered with lilacs, and kitchen shelves, covered with oilcloth. And they had a child, says the sandbox made from a tractor tire. Money was scarce, say the jars of plum preserves and canned tomatoes, sealed in the cellar hole, and the winter's cold, say the rags in the empty window frames. It was lonely here, says the narrow country road. Something went wrong, says the empty house, in a weed-choked yard. Stones in the fields, say he was not a farmer. The still-sealed jars on the cellar say she left in a nervous haste. And the child, its toys are strewn in the yard, like branches after a storm, a rubber cow, a dusty tractor with a broken plow, a doll in overalls. Something went wrong, they say. So as I was reading that, do you kind of hear the rhythm in what I'm saying? We kind of pick up on that rhythm based on how the lines are broken up. So sometimes they don't just do a whole sentence in a line, right? Sometimes they'll start a new line in the middle of a sentence, and that creates a rhythm when you're reading it in your head and when you're reading it out loud. So that's just something I want you guys to take note of because we talked about that in our last little direct teach section. So now that we've read this, let's kind of talk about the SWIFTT method. So first we're going to talk about S, which is speaker. So what do we know about the speaker? This one's kind of hard. We know that it's someone that can see the property, but do we know it's necessarily like a person, a character? We don't know much about it. Is this person omniscient? Do they know everything? I'm going to go ahead and say that they're not omniscient because they're saying things like something went wrong. So they're not identifying what exactly happened. They're just kind of noticing that the people who lived here left in a rush and they left things in kind of a sad state and things have only gotten sadder since time has gone on. So my assumption here is that it's a person that's able to explore the property, guessing about what happened, but I don't know that for sure. So if I was filling out a worksheet on SWIFTT, I might say something like, narrator is able to see the property, they're guessing about what happened and why things got left behind. It's kind of a collective voice because it says something went wrong, they say. So they're kind of like telling you how maybe the town is reacting or maybe how people are gossiping about what happened. But they're not omniscient because they don't know. So moving on to W for word choice. So what words kind of stand out to you when you're reading this poem? To me, it's words like lonely, broken, dusty, weed-choked yard. When you hear the word choked, that gives you a reaction, right? You imagine something kind of like cutting off your air supply. So if the yard is choked with weeds, you know it's really been a long time since somebody tried to take care of this house. Something went wrong, they say. And they even repeat that a couple times. So when you hear the word wrong, it's kind of like, oh, that's not a good thing. So all these different words, how are they being used to evoke an emotion? To me, I'm definitely getting a very miserable, kind of sad and lonely emotion. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to tone. But how did the author is definitely using these words to appeal to those feelings. So moving on to I, imagery. There is a lot of imagery in this poem. Almost everything that they describe is imagery. They're talking about, just in the first stanza, the size of his shoes. You imagine broken dishes, the length of the bed, the broken Bible, um, the floor below the window dusty with sun. So all of this is descriptive language that's really painting a picture of this abandoned farmhouse. It's telling you what level of disarray the house is in, and it's really kind of making you imagine, like, oh, it's not just abandoned, it was abandoned in a hurry, and it was left in a lot of disarray, and it's a very sad story to think about. So moving on to F, we have figurative language. So do you guys remember what type of figurative language it is if we give characteristics to an inanimate object or a non-human object, but it sounds like a human? That's called personification, right? And so there's a lot of personification in this poem. So hopefully, in real life, if we were talking literally, there would not be talking shoes or talking broken dishes or talking beds. But in this poem, they say that all of these things say something. So think about why that is. They're talking about kind of the assumptions and the inferences that can be drawn from something. So he was a big man, says the size of his shoes. So his shoes are not actually talking. This is figurative language, right? It's personification. So it's saying that because you can see how large his shoes are, you can assume or you can infer that he was a large man. So I know that kind of seems obvious, but the fact that there's no one there to actually speak for this family, right? It's just the objects left behind. So when it's just the objects kind of talking, that kind of evokes even more of that lonely feeling of this poem. So not just personification, we also have similes. So here down at the bottom it says, its toys are strewn in the yard like branches after a storm. So that simile, because it uses the word like, it's saying that the toys are kind of just left in these random odd places, like branches might be after a really bad storm. And the word storm itself kind of helps us understand what happened here. Is it an actual storm, or is it maybe a metaphorical storm? Like maybe there was something that made them have to leave very quickly, like illness or a war, or maybe they lost their farm because of money. So thinking about why would they compare the toys in the yard to a storm. So authors do that on purpose, right? They also have repetition. So it repeats. Something went wrong, they say. Something went wrong. Though, why do you think the author might repeat something like that? Are they really trying to drive home a point about there being something negative that happened here? This wasn't just a family moving. This was something that made them leave in a hurry. And then we also have some examples of alliteration. So remember, alliteration is the repetition of those beginning noises. So when it says things like, say the size of his shoes, that's repeating the S noise. Bible with a broken back, repeating that B noise. That's all used to kind of create a rhythm within the poem and kind of like draw your eye and draw your attention to those things. So that was talking about figurative language. Now let's move on to kind of the theme. And themes can be kind of hard for poems because sometimes themes are just a quick little snapshot of a moment. So for me, just at first glance of this poem, I'm definitely picking up on themes of abandonment. That's kind of repeated throughout this, not just in the title, but just the fact that things were left behind. And these things that are being left behind are telling us a story. So I'm not going to pick a theme that's only specific to this poem, like something sad happened here and the family abandoned it. That's too specific, right? So that's not a theme. But abandonment can be a theme. And these items being left behind telling a story, maybe we could convert that into a theme like items can talk too, or items tell a story, or you can tell a lot from the things that were left behind. This is hard stuff. Finding a theme in a poem can be hard, guys. And then moving on to tone. So we talked a little bit earlier when we were talking about word choice. We saw words like weed-choked yard and lonely and nervous and broken and dusty. Those all evoke a tone. So when you're looking at your tone chart, think about what category you're going to look at. For me, I'm immediately going to the sorrow, fear, and worry tab because I'm not getting any traces of happiness here. Yes, it's nice that there's a family and that there was children, but we're focusing on the fact that they left these things that were so important to them behind. When was the last time you moved houses and left behind like your shoes and your toys and your food? Probably not. It was probably the only time we would do that is maybe like in our instance, might be like a hurricane, or, and depending on where this poem took place, that might be something like a tornado, or maybe if their farm wasn't doing very well, maybe they were forced to leave and had to leave their things behind. We don't really know as the reader. All I can tell is that something, like it says, something went wrong and something is sad. So when I'm looking at the tone chart, I might pick words like lonely, sorrowful, melancholic, really strong words that really evoke that sad feeling. So that was Abandoned Farmhouse by Ted Kooser. And you got to kind of see how I went through the Swift method and thought about all these things and really looked at this poem in a deeper way than maybe I would have if I had just read it on its own. So we're going to practice this one more time together, and then you guys are going to be doing this on your own. You're going to be analyzing a poem using the Swift method. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video here. If you guys want to go back and take notes on what the SWIFT method stands for, I think that would be very helpful. Maybe just writing down what each one stands for and maybe some of the key questions that go with each one. I think that would help you when you're filling out a chart on a poem. You'll be able to see, like, okay, what am I looking for here? Yes, I can identify the figurative language, but what do I really need to know about it? So go back, take a couple notes on this. This will have its own, you don't have to listen to this video again. I'll kind of put just the slideshow underneath it so you can look at it. But it's really important that you guys, thank you if you've made it this far, that you've listened to kind of me ramble on about my analysis of this poem. But I really just wanted to give you an example before we set you free to do your own. So if you have any questions at this point, now would be a great time to reach out to your teachers and just kind of say, hey, I watched this video, I saw her give an example, but I don't really understand what I'm going to do. So make sure you're asking for help if you guys need it. Don't just wait till you have to turn something in. Ask now before you have to do something on your own. Alrighty? All right, well, I will see you in the next video.